This is Atlas's third session, I think, with the saddle pad. And then at this point, I've changed to a different one. And I'm going to start putting it on his back a little bit more. So I'm just asking him to come up to the pad, and I have the surcingle out. I'm going to kind of work with that a little bit. And I'm just reinforcing him for being curious and for targeting it. And then I'll kind of put him in position here. I'm going to use that mounting block again as just a little bit of a barrier between the two of us. A little bit of a protected contact. I could also do this in protected contact. That would be a good idea. So now I'm just kind of reviewed there. I put the pad on his shoulder, and then I just kind of open it up a little bit and put it halfway on his back, and now all the way on his back, clicking as it's on, or most of the way, and then taking it off and reinforcing. So I should have been using my cone at this point because that had been really good for him. That start button, he really thrives with that. He does really well. I guess I thought at this point that he was like fine with it. The other two lessons were so good. I was like, oh, he'll be totally fine. I do like how he reacted when I threw it on the ground. He didn't worry about it at all, and he was interested in touching it while I was on the ground. But that is a mistake I made, was not bringing his start button cue cone, and I put it on him and then just left it there for far too long. So it's just a saddle pad, just fell right off. I just cut out where he wandered off, and he just wandered back on, or back in. So I hadn't practiced at all putting the pad on and building duration for the amount of time it can be up there. I just put it up there, and then he was like, oh, I don't like this, and he got a little tight, and then being Atlas, he just goes from a little bit of tightness and then he just goes into flight. So that was definitely my fault. Now, this is a great example of what not to do and how you have to build up a behavior again. So when this happens, now I have to go back and kind of build this behavior up, because the whole idea was to desensitize him to the saddle pad. And now I've sensitized him to this pad inadvertently when he ran away and it fell off. But, that's an escape behavior, and those can be tricky to get rid of. So really, ideally, I don't want that to happen at all. But if it does, this is going to be how I fix it, because I'm not perfect. This was, again, me doing this for the first time. So we're going to work on just building up that duration and making sure that this pad is really positive again. So I also need that cone because that really worked really well. But so I have the little like holder thing on it's an English saddle pad, and I've kind of undone the Velcro there. So I have a little bit of a handle, which is nice. So really what I need to be doing is pad goes on for 1 second, click, pull off, feed. Because before I had put it on and then I was just going to feed him, which when you're starting out, it doesn't seem like a lot of time. You're like, okay, it's on there and I'm gonna take it right off. And for a lot of horses, that's not gonna matter. For him, it matters. I literally have to do 1 second multiple times, then 2 seconds multiple times, and then three, and then build from there. He can't go from the pad's never really been fully on his back to a full 5-6 seconds, however long it takes me to feed him his reward. So that's what caused that big reaction. So that's one of the keys there that I learned not to do. I am happy with him coming back so quickly. I do like his body language here as well. So, I mean, luckily, like, he didn't have that, like, fear response with that fleeing, like, really, like, in there. Because I didn't restrain him, that's probably a big part of this, is we have a good history together, and we have, like, he has, a lot of positive history with me and not a negative one, or a lot of pressure and stuff. So that's part of it, and that he's not restrained. He was free to leave, he was free to come back. So, like, the part that I cut out was just him. He left for a second, he literally trotted back. And then you just couldn't see that part because it's out of the camera frame, so I cut it back to where he came back into the camera frame. So, not an ideal behavior, but a much better than what it could have been using like natural horsemanship stuff. So, but that's a big thing to think about, is all of those things really, is where if they go over threshold, you can turn a desensitizing into a sensitizing. The flea behaviors can become really ingrained, and then what you've been pairing like your presence with your horse. Is it positive? Is it negative? So, and going slow. So all of those things are really important. So now it's on, so about 2-3 seconds, I click, I pull it off. And this is looking very, very nice. This is how I should have started. But I think I was doing better than I thought. So 1, 2, 3, 4, click, pull off. Very nice. And I also should have been using that start button too. So I was changing things up too much. I didn't have my start button, and then I just left the pad on for far too long, and that's what caused that reaction. So it's on, 1, 2, 3, 4, click, pull off. I do like that he's putting his head down too. I like that he's interacting with the pad. Those are all good signs, especially after him running away from it. That's pretty good. And most domestic horses are probably not going to do this. Atlas is a wild horse. He never had a saddle pad on his back, so he just thinks predator. Most domestic horses don't. Some will, but this is pretty dramatic. And then he gets scared of it again. But yeah, so most domestic horses it's not going to be that intense of a reaction. Because Atlas is a Mustang and Atlas is a sensitive horse just in general. So I think like Castor probably wouldn't have done that either, even though he is a Mustang, just because of his personality. So again, about 4 seconds, I'm clicking, pulling off, and feeding. So pat on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, click, pull off. And I don't know exactly how fast I was counting in there. I don't think you can hear it on the actual video because it was windy, but I might have been counting a little bit slower than that. So pat on, 1, 2, 3, 4, so about 5 because I was talking earlier. But what I typically do now, specifically with Atlas or another kind of sensitive horse, would be put it on, and then I'd be 1, click, feed, and then I do that 3 times successfully. So not him being tense or anything like that. And then I'd move on to 2 seconds, do that 3 times successfully, 3, so on. So it can be slow, it can be boring to watch, but it works. And once that's done and I've built up to 10, usually after 10 I can really chunk it a little bit, and I can do 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, that kind of a thing, depending on their body language. And at this point, like, this is 2 years after I've done this video is when I'm voicing it over, so I've got a lot more experience, but I can start doing that once I get to about 10 and they've understood the behavior, and I've put this pad on a bunch of times. That's the other thing, is with this way of doing it, I put the pad on and taken it off many, many, many times, versus with a lot of natural horsemanship stuff, I put the pad on a couple times. They're usually pretty tight and tense about it. And then I put the saddle on, I tighten it up, and then they usually just run around until they stop running and you take it off. So I've put it on maybe 5 times, maybe slightly more depending on your trainer. But then usually after that first couple of sessions where you're saddling that horse, you just put the saddle on once and then that's it. So he's getting a lot more repetitions. And on film, it's very boring to watch, yes, but this is giving him a great experience. Like he's like solid. He's like, pad on, awesome, great. Pad falls on the ground, okay, cool. Like he doesn't care. And then once I can build up all this duration and he has a good positive experience with it, those behaviors don't fall apart. That's why I see a lot of horses trained with negative reinforcement and their horse is 10, 12, 15 years old and he's still cold back. Why is he still cold back? Obviously this could be a physical issue, and a lot of times it is a physical issue, but sometimes it's just that horse still has that fear from a long time ago, or from, I mean, could be another way the horse is ridden at the time too. So, but yeah, I don't want him to be 10 and still be afraid of the saddle, afraid of the saddle blanket. Just because I can ride a horse doesn't mean he's not afraid of the saddle. So again, back to our training. So on and off. He was a little tense there. I kind of inadvertently have trained this head shaking in, which I don't really necessarily want or need. I did bring out the cone, so I'm going back to that. So that looks good. So he touches the cone, pad on, click, count 1, click, pull it off. Pretty nice. But yeah, lots of mistakes, but learning experience for sure. So we made some different mistakes, but it's definitely a learning experience and it's gotten a lot better. So I just have that little Velcro piece on the pad there. I don't know what the actual term for that is, but I wanted to get him used to that as well, that back Velcro kind of ripping. So I'm making that sound with the Velcro and then feeding. So just kind of like conditioning him to that. So ripping of the Velcro, food, ripping of the Velcro, food, and continuing to pair that, just like I did with click. So I just want him to hear that sound and be like, oh, food's happening. So I'm just conditioning that response. So now I have the surcingle out, and I, again, should have just had one part of it, either the girth part or the surcingle part, not both of them, and that is way too much. You can see his reaction. He's really tight. He kind of tips his hips towards you. That looks like a typical reaction, like a horse that's saddled for the first time using like negative reinforcement. You just put it on and he's really tight, but he's not moving. So the people are like, oh, he's fine. Not fine. He's definitely thinking about kicking out if he needs to. Like this position that he's at right now, where he's got his hind leg resting, I don't think is necessarily like him being relaxed. I think he's just tight. Um, but yeah, I don't know why I thought that he was ready for the whole thing to be together, like connected, and I don't know why I thought I could put it all on at once either. That was just not a good idea. But especially with what had just happened with the pad. I should have gone back. I should have just had him touch the surcingle with his nose and then done the whole thing that I did with the ropes. So I'm not sure what I was thinking this day, because the whole thing with the ropes that all the videos just saw with all the ropes and stuff, he did so well. I could have just had the surcingle out and had him target it with his face, target it with his cheek, his neck, and then had him touch it with his shoulder, done his whole body, and then just put a tiny little bit of it over his back. Just like I did with the saddle pad and the ropes and everything else. I don't know what happened. I don't know why I did that. But it is a good learning experience. I'm not saying do this. Definitely don't do what I'm doing right now. If you have a domestic horse that's really calm, yes. If you have Atlas, like a horse like Atlas, then no. So I just had a momentary lapse in judgment for this day. But he overall is doing okay. I don't like that he was tight and like really tense in his body. But then he has seemed like he's calmed a little bit. Um, the hind leg cocking is a little bit hard to read. I do think he's still tense just with his other body language, because that can be a relaxed horse. That could be a horse that is tight. And he's kind of like bobbing his head up and down to get that target, like he's not touching it, and then he's pulling his head up quickly. That was much better. So I think he's still a little bit tight. And I probably should have worked with the rope, like going over his back a little bit more. We did do some of that. He was also kind of afraid of that as well, as you saw in the other videos. So I think he just needed to build this up a little bit. I combined too many things a little too quickly. So I lumped too many things. So I have the surcingle attached to the girth, and I put it all on his back at once, and you saw the result of that. He actually held it together well, for me knowing him. But I don't need to sensitize him any more than I already have. So just breaking that lesson down into lots of tiny pieces is just going to help everybody. So wait for him here, have him touch that cone. That looks pretty good. And then just a little bit, that looks better. Just kind of putting maybe a quarter of the surcingle or a third of the surcingle over his back. That looks better. I should have started with that. But also, like, having the girth attached to the surcingle, it doesn't seem like a big deal, especially to like a domestic horse, but for him, like, it's moving a lot more and the buckles make noise. So there's a lot more going on. That's potentially scary. I also need to be a little bit slower with my surcingle, and I just needed to take that time to have him target it, because like I'm kind of swinging it on and he's not quite ready for that, and it's kind of hitting the mounting block too. So I just should have just taken my time and had him target it on both sides of his body, like I did with the hose and the rope. So, and he's definitely not ready for it to lay on him yet. So I just went a little too fast.